first day at a new school is never easy. For 17-year-old Daniel Kim, it felt like walking onto a stage where everyone already knew their lines except him. He pushed through the heavy double doors of Westfield High, his backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the crowded hallway for room 204. Daniel wasn't the kind of kid who stood out. Average height, maybe a bit on the thin side, always wearing clothes that were just a size too big. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that let him hide behind it when he wanted to. And he wanted to most of the time. Being invisible had its advantages, especially when you were the new kid for the third time in 4 years. His dad's job kept moving them around. New city, new school, new faces that all blurred together after a while. Daniel had learned not to get too attached to places or people. It was easier that way, less painful when the moving truck showed up again. The morning classes passed in a blur of introductions he'd rather not make and teachers mispronouncing his last name. By lunch, Daniel had already mapped out the quietest corners of the school. The library was too obvious. The courtyard near the gym was packed with kids playing basketball. But then he found it. A small area behind the main building next to the school's outdoor pool facility. A few benches, some shade from the trees, and most importantly, almost empty. He sat down with his lunch, pulled out a worn paperback from his bag, and let himself relax for the first time all day. The sound of water splashing came from the pool area where the swim team was practicing. Daniel could hear the coach shouting instructions, the rhythmic breathing of swimmers doing laps. It was peaceful in a way, reminded him of his own training sessions back home. Back home. The words felt strange even in his own head. Where was home anymore? What Daniel's new classmates didn't know, what nobody at Westfield High could possibly guess by looking at him, was that the quiet, skinny new kid had spent most of his life in dojos and training centers. His grandfather had started teaching him when he was 5 years old. Traditional martial arts first, the kind with deep bows and discipline that sank into your bones. Then came the grappling, the ground fighting, the kind of techniques that didn't look pretty but worked when nothing else did. By the time Daniel was 12, he was competing in youth tournaments, racking up medals his mom kept in a box in the garage because Daniel never wanted them displayed. By 15, he'd trained with some of the best coaches in 3 different states. Each move his family made somehow leading him to another teacher, another style to absorb. His parents had one rule that never changed no matter where they lived. The training was for defense, for discipline, for building character. Never for showing off. Never for ego. His father would always say the same thing after every session. The strongest people are the ones who never need to prove it. So Daniel kept quiet about his abilities. He wore the oversized hoodies that hid the muscle definition on his arms and shoulders. He walked with his head down, shoulders slightly hunched, making himself smaller than he really was. Not because he was afraid, but because he'd learned that sometimes the best fight was the one you never had to have. He'd dealt with bullies before. Every new school had them. Like some kind of welcoming committee nobody wanted. Daniel had figured out that guys like that were looking for a reaction. They wanted you to fight back, to give them a reason to escalate. So he didn't. He just let their words slide off him like water off glass and waited for them to get bored and move on to easier targets. It usually worked. The swim team practice ended, and Daniel watched as a group of guys emerged from the pool area. They were loud, confident, moving through space like they owned it. The kind of guys who peaked in high school and would spend the rest of their lives talking about it. At the center of the group was someone who was clearly the leader. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that specific kind of swagger that came from being the best at something and knowing everyone knew it. Their eyes met for just a second. Daniel looked away first, back down at his book. He didn't catch the way the guy's expression shifted, didn't see the moment of calculation that passed across his face. But if he had, Daniel might have recognized it. That look that said, new territory, new challenge, new kid who needs to learn his place. The rest of the week passed quietly. Daniel kept to his routine. Classes, lunch by the pool area, more classes, then home to the small apartment his family had rented on the east side of town. His evenings were spent the same way they'd been spent for years in training. His dad had found a gym nearby. A rundown place with cracked mats and equipment that had seen better days. But it had everything Daniel needed. He'd drill techniques until his muscles burned, work the heavy bag until his knuckles were raw, practice his breathing and meditation until the chaos in his head settled into something manageable. This was his real world, the one that made sense. Everything else was just noise. By Friday of his first week, Daniel thought maybe this school would be different. Maybe he'd get through senior year without any drama. He should have known better. It started small, the way these things always did. Books knocked off his desk as someone walked by, muttered comments just loud enough for him to hear but quiet enough to deny if a teacher asked. A few guys from the swim team, the same ones he'd seen that first day, had apparently decided he was worth their attention. The tall one, the leader, his name was Brett something. Daniel had heard it in the hallways, always said with a certain respect or fear he couldn't tell which. Brett was captain of the swim team, popular with a specific crowd, the kind of guy who'd probably get a scholarship to some decent college and think that made him special. Daniel ignored it all. Let them have their fun. They'd get bored eventually, but Brett didn't get bored. If anything, Daniel's lack of reaction seemed to make things worse. It was like Brett had expected a fight, wanted a fight, and Daniel's refusal to engage was somehow more insulting than throwing a punch would have been. On Friday afternoon, Daniel was heading to his usual spot when he felt someone grab his backpack from behind, yanking him backward. He stumbled but kept his balance, years of training making his body respond automatically even as his mind stayed calm. "Hey, new kid." Brett's voice came from behind him. "You got a problem with where you're sitting?" Daniel turned slowly, keeping his face neutral, his body language non-threatening. "3 of them today. Brett and 2 others whose names he didn't know. Standard pack mentality, no problem," Daniel said quietly. "Just eating lunch." "Yeah, well, that's our spot," one of the other guys said. "Been our spot since freshman year. It wasn't their spot." Daniel had been sitting there all week without any issue. But he recognized what this really was. A test, a challenge. They were looking for an excuse, any excuse. "Okay," Daniel said simply. He picked up his bag, ready to walk away. The confusion on their faces was almost funny. They'd expected him to argue, to push back, to give them something to work with. His acceptance threw them off balance. Brett stepped closer and Daniel could smell the chlorine on his clothes, see the calculation in his eyes. This guy wasn't done. This was just beginning. "What, you scared?" Brett asked, loud enough for the few other students nearby to hear. Daniel met his eyes just for a moment and something passed between them. Later, Daniel would wonder if Brett had seen something in that look, some hint of what lay beneath the surface, some instinct that said this wasn't as simple as it seemed. But whatever Brett might have felt, his pride was louder. He couldn't back down now, not in front of his friends, not in front of witnesses. "See you around, new kid," Brett said, and there was a promise in those words that Daniel recognized all too well. Daniel walked away, found another spot to finish his lunch, and tried to focus on his book, but the words blurred on the page. He knew what was coming. He'd seen this movie before, knew how it ended. He just hoped he could get through it without anyone getting hurt. The weekend gave Daniel a break from Westfield High, but Monday morning came too fast. He knew something had shifted that Friday afternoon. Brett had marked him as a target, and guys like Brett didn't just forget and move on. They needed to prove something, to themselves and everyone watching. Daniel's mom noticed him moving slower than usual at breakfast. "Everything okay at the new school?" she asked, pouring coffee into her travel mug. "Yeah, fine," Daniel said automatically. He'd learned not to worry his parents with this stuff. They had enough on their plates with the move, his dad's new job, his younger sister adjusting to middle school. Besides, what would he even say? Some guys were bothering him? His mom would want to call the school, make it official, and that would only make everything 10 times worse. "You sure?" His dad looked up from his tablet, that knowing look in his eyes. His dad had been through this too, growing up. Maybe that's why he'd been so insistent on the martial arts training. "You'd tell us if something was going on, right?" "Yeah, Dad, I'm good. Just tired." It wasn't really a lie. He was tired. Tired of being the new kid. Tired of the same patterns playing out at every school. Tired of having to choose between standing up for himself and making things worse. At school, the harassment started before first period. Daniel was at his locker when someone slammed it shut, nearly catching his fingers. He turned to see one of Brett's friends, the stocky one with the buzz cut whose name he'd learned was Jake. "Oops," Jake said with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." Daniel didn't respond. He just reopened his locker, grabbed his books, and walked away. He could hear Jake laughing behind him, saying something to his friends, but Daniel kept walking. First bell hadn't even rung yet, and it was already starting. In English class, someone had written "loser" on his desk in permanent marker. The teacher didn't notice or pretended not to. Daniel sat down anyway, positioning his notebook to cover the word. The girl next to him, a quiet kid with glasses and a pile of library books, gave him a sympathetic look but didn't say anything. Nobody ever did. Lunch was worse. Daniel had found a new spot inside the cafeteria this time at a table in the far corner. He thought maybe staying where there were more people, more witnesses, would help. He was wrong. Brett and his crew walked past his table 3 times. Each time it was something different. The first pass, Brett accidentally bumped the table hard enough to make Daniel's water bottle tip over, spilling across his lunch. The second time, Jake knocked Daniel's backpack off the chair onto the floor. The third time, Connor, the third member of their group, grabbed the book Daniel was reading right out of his hands. "What's this?" Connor held it up, showing it to Brett. "Kid reads during lunch. What a freak." "Give it back," Daniel said quietly. His voice was calm, but inside something was starting to shift. He could feel it, that familiar heat building in his chest that his grandfather had taught him to control. "Oh, he speaks," Brett said, sliding into the seat across from Daniel. Up close, Daniel could see Brett was bigger than he'd thought. Probably 6'2", maybe 190. Used to using his size to intimidate. "What's wrong, new kid? Don't like people touching your stuff?" Daniel looked at him, really looked at him, analyzed him the way his coaches had taught him. Strong upper body from swimming, but probably not much ground game. Used to being the alpha, never been challenged. The type who'd throw wild punches if things got physical, all power and no technique. "Just want my book back," Daniel said. Brett leaned forward. "You know what I think? I think you're sitting in my school, breathing my air, and you haven't shown the proper respect. I think you need to learn your place." A small crowd had started to gather. This was what Brett wanted, Daniel realized. An audience, a show. Guys like Brett needed witnesses to validate their dominance. "I'm not looking for trouble," Daniel said, keeping his voice even. "Too bad," Brett said. "Trouble found you." Connor tossed the book across the cafeteria. It hit the wall and fell behind the trash cans. A few people laughed. Most just watched, grateful it wasn't happening to them. Daniel stood up slowly, carefully, making no sudden movements. He walked to the trash cans, bent down, and retrieved his book. The cover was bent, pages crumpled. He'd had this book since 8th grade, read it maybe 10 times. It was one of the few things that had stayed constant through all the moves. When he turned around, Brett was right there, close enough that Daniel could have taken him down in 3 moves. Sweep the leg, control the fall, transition to a submission hold. 5 seconds, maybe less. But his father's voice was in his head. "The strongest people are the ones who never need to prove it." "You got something to say?" Brett asked. Daniel looked him in the eyes. "No." The answer seemed to confuse Brett again. He'd wanted a confrontation, a reason to escalate. Daniel wasn't giving it to him. "You're weird, man," Brett said finally. "Something's off about you." Daniel just walked away, leaving his lunch behind. He wasn't hungry anymore anyway. The rest of the week followed the same pattern. Brett and his friends were everywhere. They'd knock into Daniel in the hallways, hard enough to hurt but not so hard a teacher would notice. They'd make comments just loud enough for him to hear. They started spreading rumors, stupid stuff that wasn't even creative, saying Daniel had gotten kicked out of his last school, that he was on probation, that he had some kind of weird disease. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter in high school. The rumors spread anyway, and soon other kids were avoiding Daniel too. Not because they believed the stories, but because being associated with the target made you a target. By Thursday, Daniel was eating lunch in his car. By Friday, he was seriously considering asking his parents if he could finish senior year online. But Friday afternoon changed everything. Daniel had stayed late in the library, working on an assignment. By the time he finished, most of the school was empty. The buses had left, the parking lot was clearing out, and the hallways echoed with emptiness. He was walking toward the exit when he heard voices, male voices laughing. Something in his gut told him to take a different route, but the voices were coming from the direction of the only exit that was still unlocked after hours. Daniel turned the corner and saw them. Brett, Jake, and Connor standing near the doors that led to the indoor pool area. They weren't alone. They had cornered someone, a freshman kid who looked terrified. "Come on, man, just give us your phone," Brett was saying. The kid was crying. "It's my mom's phone." "She'll kill me if I lose it," Daniel should have walked away, should have found another exit, called security, done anything except what he was about to do. But something in him snapped. Maybe it was seeing the fear on that kid's face. Maybe it was all the frustration from the past 3 weeks finally boiling over. "Leave him alone," Daniel said. All 4 of them turned to look at him. The freshman's eyes went wide with something between hope and horror. Brett's face split into a grin. "Well, well," Brett said. "Look who decided to grow a spine." "I said leave him alone," Daniel repeated. Brett handed something to Jake, then started walking toward Daniel. "You know what? I've been waiting for this. You've been getting on my nerves since day 1 with your quiet little act. Like you're better than everyone else." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Daniel said. "I just want you to leave that kid alone." "Or what?" Brett was right in front of him now. "What are you going to do about it, new kid?" The freshman saw his chance and ran, footsteps echoing down the hallway. Brett didn't even turn to watch him go. He was focused entirely on Daniel now. "Just you and me now," Brett said. "Well, me and my boys. And you alone." Jake and Connor moved to flank Daniel, blocking any escape route. They'd done this before, Daniel realized. This wasn't spontaneous. They knew exactly how to corner someone. "We were going to wait," Brett continued. "But you just had to play hero. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to teach you a lesson about respect, about knowing your place." "You don't want to do this," Daniel said quietly. "Oh, I really do," Brett said. He reached out to grab Daniel's shirt, and that's when everything changed. Because Daniel, for the first time since arriving at Westfield High, didn't step back, didn't walk away, didn't de-escalate. He just stood there, perfectly still, perfectly balanced, and said 4 words that would change everything. "Okay, your choice." Brett's hand was inches from Daniel's collar when they heard footsteps. A teacher, Mr. Harrison, came around the corner carrying a stack of papers. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between the 4 of them. "Nothing," Brett said quickly, smoothly. "Just talking." Mr. Harrison looked suspicious but didn't push it. "School's closed. All of you need to leave now." They dispersed, but as Brett walked past Daniel, he leaned in close. "Monday," he whispered. "This isn't over." Daniel watched them leave, his heart pounding, not from fear but from something else. Something he'd been pushing down for 3 weeks. Mr. Harrison's interruption had saved them all from something, but Daniel wasn't sure if it had saved Brett or saved Daniel from having to reveal what he really was. He walked to his car, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the adrenaline of almost letting go. Monday was going to be interesting. Monday morning felt different. Daniel woke up before his alarm, that nervous energy already coursing through him. He knew today was going to be the day. Brett had made a promise, and guys like Brett always kept those kinds of promises. His dad was already up, drinking coffee in the kitchen. "Big day?" he asked, like he could sense something. "Just another Monday," Daniel said, but his dad gave him that look, the one that said he knew there was more to the story. "Remember what Grandpa used to say?" his dad said as Daniel headed for the door. "A calm mind is sharper than any fist." Daniel nodded. He'd need that calm today. School started normally enough. First period, second period, nothing unusual. Brett and his friends weren't in any of Daniel's morning classes, and the hallways were crowded enough that they didn't cross paths. But Daniel could feel it, that electricity in the air before a storm. Other kids were looking at him differently, like they knew something was coming. At lunch, Daniel didn't even bother going to the cafeteria. He grabbed his backpack and headed for the library, thinking maybe he could hide out there until the day ended. But the library was closed for some kind of maintenance work. Signs everywhere saying it would reopen tomorrow. He stood in the empty hallway trying to decide what to do next. That's when he heard it. Footsteps behind him, multiple sets. "There he is," Brett's voice echoed down the corridor. "Been looking for you, new kid." Daniel turned slowly. Brett, Jake, and Connor were walking toward him with purpose. The hallways were mostly empty during lunch, just a few students scattered around, but no teachers in sight. "We had plans on Friday," Brett said. "Got interrupted. Thought we should finish what we started." "I don't want any trouble," Daniel said, the words automatic now. "Yeah, you keep saying that," Jake said. "But here's the thing. You disrespected Brett, you embarrassed him. That's got consequences." Daniel looked around. No teachers, no security guards, just a few students who immediately looked away, not wanting to get involved. He was on his own. "Listen," Daniel said, trying one more time. "Whatever you think needs to happen here, it doesn't. We can just walk away. Nobody has to get hurt, Brett laughed. Nobody's going to get hurt. Except you. We're just going to teach you some manners. Show you how things work around here. They moved closer, forming a semicircle around him. Daniel felt his training kick in automatically, his body reading their positions, their body language, calculating distances and angles. Jake was favoring his right side. Connor kept his weight on his back foot. Brett led with his chest, all confidence and no guard. Last chance, Daniel said quietly. Walk away, or what? Brett stepped right into Daniel's space. You going to fight all three of us? Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing steady, centered, his grandfather's voice in his head. When you have no choice but to act. Act without hesitation, act without anger. Act with precision. Brett reached out to shove Daniel's shoulder, probably planning to start with some pushing before it escalated to real violence. But the second his hand made contact, Daniel moved. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flying kicks or flashy moves. Daniel simply redirected Brett's energy, using a basic Aikido technique, stepping to the side and guiding Brett's momentum past him. Brett stumbled forward, off balance, surprise on his face. What the? Brett started to say, but Jake was already moving in. Jake threw a punch, telegraphing it a mile away. Daniel ducked under it easily, used Jake's forward motion against him and swept his legs. Jake went down hard on the floor, the air rushing out of his lungs. Connor hesitated, suddenly unsure. That hesitation told Daniel everything he needed to know. Connor didn't really want to be here. He was just following Brett, caught up in pack mentality. You can walk away, Daniel said to Connor. This doesn't have to be your fight. But Brett was back up now, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Get him! He shouted at Connor. Connor moved in reluctantly. Daniel didn't want to hurt him, could see the fear in Connor's eyes. So when Connor reached for him, Daniel used the gentlest technique in his arsenal, a simple wrist lock that didn't cause pain, just controlled Connor's movement, guiding him down to his knees. Stay, Daniel said softly, releasing him. Connor stayed down, grateful for the excuse. Now it was just Brett, and Brett was furious. He'd been humiliated in front of his friends, his dominance challenged, his whole identity as the tough guy crumbling. He charged at Daniel like a linebacker, all muscle and rage and no technique. Daniel could have ended it right there, could have used any number of techniques that would have put Brett on the ground, hurt him badly. But that voice was still in his head, his father's words, his grandfather's teachings. Strength isn't about dominating others, it's about protecting yourself without destroying them. So Daniel defended. He blocked Brett's wild swings, deflected his grabbing hands, stayed just out of reach while using minimal energy. To anyone watching, it looked like Brett was fighting air. Every time he thought he had Daniel, Daniel wasn't there anymore. Stop moving. Brett shouted, breathing hard now, sweat dripping down his face. Stop swinging, Daniel replied calmly. This went on for maybe 2 minutes, though it felt longer. Brett was getting tired, his movements sloppier, his breathing labored. Swimming might have given him upper body strength and endurance in water, but this was different. This was sustained combat, and he wasn't trained for it. Finally, Brett overextended on a punch, left himself completely open. Daniel could have countered with a dozen different strikes, could have ended it decisively. Instead, he just stepped aside and let Brett's momentum carry him into the lockers with a loud bang. Brett slumped against the metal, chest heaving, completely exhausted. Jake was still on the floor trying to catch his breath. Connor hadn't moved from where Daniel had left him. This is done, Daniel said, his voice firm but not angry. It's over. Understand? Brett looked up at him, and for the first time there was no arrogance in his eyes. Just shock and something that might have been respect or maybe fear. It was hard to tell. What are you? Brett asked between breaths. Just someone who wanted to be left alone, Daniel said. He picked up his backpack from where it had fallen during the confrontation. I told you that you didn't want to do this. He started to walk away, but Brett called after him. Where did you learn? Daniel paused, looked back. I've been training since I was 5. Multiple styles, multiple teachers. And the most important thing they all taught me was that real strength is knowing when not to use it. I gave you so many chances to walk away. A teacher's voice suddenly echoed down the hallway. What's going on here? It was Ms. Chen, the vice principal, walking quickly toward them. She took in the scene. Brett against the lockers, Jake on the floor, Connor on his knees, and Daniel standing there looking perfectly calm with his backpack over his shoulder. Someone want to explain this? She demanded. Nobody spoke. Brett looked at his friends, then at Daniel. Daniel just waited, knowing whatever came next was out of his hands. Brett? Ms. Chen focused on him. Why are you on the floor? Brett could have lied. Could have blamed Daniel, gotten him suspended or expelled. 3 against 1, it would have been easy to spin the story. But something had changed in that hallway. Something Brett had learned about himself and about the quiet kid he'd been tormenting for 3 weeks. We fell, Brett said finally, just messing around. It got out of hand. Ms. Chen didn't look convinced. That true? She asked the others. Jake and Connor nodded quickly. Nobody looked at Daniel, and you? Ms. Chen turned to Daniel. I was just trying to get to lunch, Daniel said, which was technically true. Ms. Chen's eyes narrowed. She knew there was more to this story, but without anyone willing to tell it, her hands were tied. All of you to my office now. We're going to have a longer conversation about this. As they walked toward the administrative wing, students in the hallway parted for them. Word would spread fast. By the end of the day, everyone would know something had happened, though the details would get twisted and exaggerated with each retelling. In Ms. Chen's office, they each gave their statements. Brett stuck to his story about roughhousing that got out of control. Jake and Connor backed him up. Daniel said he was just defending himself when things got physical, which was true enough. Ms. Chen gave them all warnings. Told them she'd be watching, said that next time there would be serious consequences. But without proof of who started what, she couldn't do much more than that. As they left the office, Brett walked beside Daniel. They were alone for just a moment in the hallway. I underestimated you, Brett said quietly. You didn't know, Daniel replied. That's why you judge people by who they are, not how they look. Why didn't you really hurt us? Brett asked. You could have. I could tell you were holding back. Daniel stopped walking, turned to face him. Because hurting you wouldn't have solved anything. It would have just made me like you. Someone who uses strength to dominate others. The words hit Brett hard. Daniel could see it in his face. This is finished, Daniel said. Leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone. Deal. Brett nodded slowly. Deal. They walked away in opposite directions, and Daniel felt something release in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally have some peace at this school. He had no idea how wrong he was. Daniel thought it was over. He really did. After the confrontation in the hallway, Brett had kept his distance. No more comments in the halls. No more knocking into him, no more harassment. For 3 whole days, Westfield High felt almost normal. He should have known better. Thursday after school, Daniel stayed late again. He had a project due in history class, and the library had finally reopened. He worked until the sun started setting, the building growing quiet around him as students and teachers filtered out for the day. When he finally packed up his stuff, it was almost 6. The parking lot would be nearly empty by now. His mom would probably be wondering where he was. He sent her a quick text letting her know he was on his way home. The hallways were dim, only every third light still on for the evening. His footsteps echoed on the tile floor as he walked toward the exit. That's when he heard voices up ahead, low voices, angry voices, and then he heard something that made his blood run cold. Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. It was a girl's voice. Young, scared. Daniel rounded the corner and saw them. Brett, Jake, and Connor had cornered someone near the doors that led to the indoor pool area. A freshman girl with dark curly hair and a backpack covered in band pins. She looked terrified. Come on, we just want to talk, Brett was saying, but his tone wasn't friendly. It was threatening. Daniel's stomach dropped. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about Brett reasserting his dominance, proving he was still the one in control. And if Brett was willing to intimidate a girl, things had escalated beyond typical bullying. Hey, Daniel called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Leave her alone. All 4 of them turned. The girl's eyes went wide with hope. Brett's face darkened. You, Brett said, should have known you'd show up. Let her go, Daniel said, walking closer but keeping his distance. Whatever this is, she's not part of it. This doesn't concern you, Jake said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. He'd felt what Daniel could do. He didn't want to repeat. Yes, it does, Daniel said firmly. He looked at the girl. Go now. She didn't need to be told twice. She ducked under Connor's arm and ran, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded completely. Now it was just the 4 of them. You just made a big mistake, Brett said, and there was something different in his voice now. Something darker. I was willing to let things go. We had a deal, but you just couldn't help yourself, could you? Had to play hero again? We did have a deal, Daniel said calmly. You agreed to leave people alone. That included her. I didn't agree to anything, Brett snapped. You think because you got lucky once you can tell me what to do? In my school? Daniel noticed something then. Brett's pupils were dilated, his movements more aggressive than usual, more erratic, and the way he was talking, faster, angrier. Something was off. Brett, just let it go, Connor said quietly. We should leave. Shut up. Brett spun on him. You've been useless since this guy showed up. Both of you. He looked at Jake too. I'm done with all of this. Done with people thinking they can disrespect me. Jake and Connor exchanged worried glances. Even they could tell something was wrong with Brett tonight. You want to know why I'm really mad? Brett moved closer to Daniel. It's not about you embarrassing me. It's about everyone thinking you're something special now. The quiet kid who knows kung fu or whatever. People talking about you like you're some kind of hero. I'm not a hero, Daniel said. I just want to be left alone. Well, you can't be, Brett shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. You're in my school, in my world, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly where you belong. He moved toward the pool doors, pushing them open. Come on, we're going to settle this. For real this time. Brett, man, this is crazy, Jake said. We should just go home. I said, come on. Brett's voice had an edge of hysteria to it now. Daniel realized with a sinking feeling what was about to happen. Brett was past reason, past thinking clearly. Whatever was driving him right now, it wasn't rational. And that made him more dangerous than any trained fighter. Brett went through the doors into the pool area. After a moment, Jake and Connor followed, looking back at Daniel like they wanted him to somehow fix this. Daniel could have walked away. Should have walked away. Called security, called the cops, let the adults handle it. But something told him that if he left now, someone was going to get hurt. Maybe Brett would take his rage out on Jake and Connor. Maybe he'd find another target. Against his better judgment, Daniel followed them into the pool area. The indoor pool was dark except for the emergency lighting, casting everything in a dim blue glow. The water was still, reflecting the lights like glass. The air smelled like chlorine and something else, something chemical and sharp. Brett was standing at the edge of the deep end, his back to the water. Jake and Connor stood off to the side, clearly uncomfortable with whatever was happening. You know what your problem is? Brett said as Daniel entered. You think you're better than everyone else. Walking around with your secrets, your training, acting like you're above it all. That's not true, Daniel said, keeping his voice calm, trying to de-escalate. I never thought I was better than anyone. Liar. Brett's shout echoed off the tile walls. You've been looking down on all of us since you got here. Too good to eat with us, too good to talk to us. Too good to be part of this school. Daniel realized then that Brett had built up an entire narrative in his head. A story where Daniel was the villain and Brett was just defending his territory. Nothing Daniel said would change that. Brett, I think you need to calm down, Daniel said carefully. You're not thinking straight right now. I'm thinking perfectly straight, Brett said, but his hands were shaking. And I'm thinking that you need to learn your place. All your fancy moves won't help you now. Before Daniel could respond, Brett lunged forward, not at Daniel, but at the controls for the pool cover. He hit a switch and the automatic cover started retracting with a mechanical whir. You want to show everyone how tough you are? Brett said. Let's see how tough you are in the water. That's my territory. That's where I'm the best. Brett, don't, Connor said, stepping forward. This is going too far. Stay back. Brett warned him. Daniel assessed the situation. The pool was at least 10 feet deep at this end. The lights were dim. Brett was acting irrationally, possibly under the influence of something. This was rapidly becoming dangerous. I'm not getting in the water with you, Daniel said firmly. Yes, you are, Brett said, and suddenly he wasn't standing at the edge anymore. He was moving fast, charging at Daniel with all his strength. Daniel sidestepped, tried to use Brett's momentum against him again, but Brett had learned. He adjusted mid-charge, wrapped his arms around Daniel's waist and used his superior weight to drive both of them toward the pool. Brett, no, Jake shouted. They hit the water together, the impact shocking in its coldness. Daniel's backpack was still on, heavy with books and his laptop immediately pulling him down. He tried to shrug it off, but Brett had him in a bear hug, dragging them both deeper. The water was dark, disorienting. Daniel could see Brett's face in front of him, contorted with rage and determination. Brett was trying to hold him under, to prove his dominance in the one place he felt most powerful. But what Brett didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Daniel had been training in water since he was 7 years old. His grandfather had made him practice techniques in a pool, teaching him how to fight when he couldn't breathe, when gravity didn't work the same way, when panic was the real enemy. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. His lungs were already burning from the surprise submersion, and the backpack was pulling him down, but panic would only make things worse. He needed to think. Brett was holding him tight, but his grip was emotional, not technical. He was strong, but strength alone wasn't enough in the water. Daniel knew this, had trained for this exact situation, though he'd never thought he'd actually need it. First, he needed to get the backpack off. Daniel twisted his shoulders, using a technique from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to create space. One strap slipped off, then the other. The backpack sank to the bottom of the pool, taking its weight with it. Now he could move. Brett tightened his grip, trying to keep Daniel under. But Daniel used a water-adapted version of a technique his jiu-jitsu coach had shown him. He tucked his chin, protected his airway, then used his legs to wrap around Brett's torso, reversing the position. Suddenly, Daniel was in control. He had Brett in a hold that wasn't meant to hurt, just to immobilize, to neutralize the threat. Brett thrashed, trying to break free, but he was burning through his oxygen fast. Daniel, trained to hold his breath for minutes at a time, waited, counted, knew exactly how long he could stay under without danger. Brett's movements became more frantic. He was realizing now that he'd made a terrible mistake, that the water wasn't his advantage, that he was in over his head in more ways than one. Daniel felt Brett's grip loosen, felt the panic setting in. That's when Daniel made his decision. He could hold Brett here, could make him pass out from lack of oxygen, could teach him the hardest lesson of his life. But that wasn't who Daniel was. Instead, he pushed both of them toward the surface, using powerful kicks that years of training had perfected. They broke through together, Brett gasping and coughing, Daniel breathing controlled and steady. Jake and Connor were at the edge of the pool, reaching down. Daniel pushed Brett toward them and they pulled him out. Brett collapsed on the tile, coughing up water, his whole body shaking. Daniel pulled himself out of the pool, water streaming from his clothes. He was cold, exhausted, and his lungs burned from holding his breath, but he was okay. More than okay, actually. He was alive, and more importantly, so was Brett. Brett was still on the tile floor, coughing and shaking. Jake and Connor knelt beside him, looking terrified. They'd just watched their friend almost drown someone else, almost cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Is he okay?" Connor asked, his voice shaky. Daniel knelt down, checked Brett's breathing. It was ragged but steady. "He'll be fine." "Just scared." "Scared?" Jake looked at Daniel with something like awe. "Dude, you were down there for like 2 minutes. We thought you were both going to die." "It wasn't 2 minutes," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe 45 seconds. Felt longer." Brett's coughing subsided. He rolled onto his side, water still dripping from his hair. When he finally looked up at Daniel, there was no anger in his eyes anymore. Just shock and something else. Shame, maybe. Or realization. "You saved me," Brett said, his voice hoarse. "I tried to drown you and you saved me." "Yeah," Daniel said simply. "Why?" It was the same question people always asked when Daniel chose not to use his full abilities, when he showed restraint instead of dominance. His grandfather had answered it best. "Because you can hurt someone doesn't mean you should. Real power is choosing not to." "Because that's not who I am," Daniel said. "And that's not who you really are either." Brett closed his eyes. "You don't know me." "I know you're scared," Daniel said. "Scared of losing your status, your reputation, whatever it is that makes you feel important. So scared that you did something really stupid tonight." Jake and Connor looked at each other, then at Brett. They'd never heard anyone talk to him like this. "I'm not scared," Brett said, but his voice cracked. "Yes, you are," Daniel said, not unkindly, "and that's okay. Everyone's scared of something. But taking it out on other people, hurting people to make yourself feel better, that's not strength. That's weakness." Brett opened his eyes, and for the first time since Daniel had met him, he saw the real person underneath all the bravado. Just a kid, not much different from himself, trying to figure out where he fit in the world. "I messed up," Brett said quietly. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "You really did." The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Multiple footsteps moving fast. Daniel's stomach dropped. Security must have been alerted. Or maybe that freshman girl had called for help. The pool area doors burst open and 2 security guards rushed in, followed by Ms. Chen and someone else. The swim coach, Daniel realized. Coach Patterson. What in the world is going on here? Coach Patterson's voice boomed across the pool area. He took in the scene. 4 soaking wet teenagers, water all over the floor. Brett still on the ground looking half drowned. Nobody spoke at first. Someone better start talking, Ms. Chen said, her voice cold. Right now. Daniel looked at Brett. This was it. The moment where Brett could either tell the truth or make up some story that would probably get everyone suspended or expelled. Whatever happened next would define who Brett really was. Brett struggled to sit up. Jake and Connor helped him. He coughed once more, then looked directly at Ms. Chen. It was my fault, Brett said. All of it. I've been bullying Daniel since he got here. Today I took it too far. I tried to, he paused, swallowed hard. I tried to hurt him. In the pool. He defended himself. Then he saved me when he could have just let me drown. The silence that followed was heavy. Ms. Chen's expression was unreadable. Coach Patterson looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Is this true? Ms. Chen asked Daniel. Yes, Daniel said. But I could have handled it differently. I could have walked away, called for help. I made choices too. Don't, Brett said, shaking his head. Don't cover for me. I did this, me, not them. He looked at Jake and Connor. They tried to stop me. They told me to leave you alone. I didn't listen. Jake and Connor looked surprised, grateful, and guilty all at once. Coach Patterson walked over to Brett. Stand up. Brett got to his feet, wobbly but upright. The coach looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel could see the disappointment in his eyes. The kind of disappointment that hurt worse than anger. You're off the team, Coach Patterson said quietly. Effective immediately. Brett's face crumbled. Coach, please. Swimming is everything to me. Then you should have thought about that before you tried to drown someone in my pool, the coach said, his voice hard. You think I can have someone like that representing this team? Representing this school? You're done, Brett. Brett looked like he might argue, but then he just nodded. I understand. All of you to my office, Ms. Chen said. Now we're calling your parents and there will be serious consequences for this. The next few hours were a blur. Phone calls to parents. Statements given. Brett's parents arrived looking shocked and angry. Daniel's parents came, his dad's face tight with concern, his mom's eyes red like she'd been crying. The story came out piece by piece. The weeks of harassment. The confrontation in the hallway. The pool incident. Jake and Connor corroborated everything, filling in details that made the picture clear. Brett didn't try to minimize or excuse what he'd done. He took full responsibility. The consequences were severe. Brett was suspended for 2 weeks, removed from the swim team permanently, and required to attend counseling. Jake and Connor got 3 days suspension for their involvement in the earlier incidents. Daniel received no punishment, but Ms. Chen made it clear that he should have sought help from adults instead of handling things himself. I know you were defending yourself, she said in her office, with Daniel's parents present. But you put yourself in danger multiple times. That's not okay. We have systems in place to protect students. I understand, Daniel said. I should have told someone sooner. His dad spoke up then. We've taught Daniel to handle conflicts peacefully when possible. But we've also taught him to protect himself and others when necessary. I'm proud of how he handled this situation. Ms. Chen nodded. Your son showed remarkable restraint and character. But in the future, Daniel, please come to us. That's what we're here for. A week later, Daniel was eating lunch in the cafeteria when someone sat down across from him. He looked up, surprised to see Brett. Can I sit here? Brett asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Brett looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something more genuine. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confident posture was subdued. I've been in counseling, Brett said, talking about why I do the things I do. It's been hard. Daniel didn't say anything, just listened. The counselor says I have anger issues and self-esteem problems, which sounds stupid, because I always acted like I was better than everyone else. But she says that's actually proof of it, that I was compensating. Brett shook his head. I'm not asking you to forgive me or anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. For everything. I appreciate that, Daniel said. That freshman girl, the one from that night? Her name's Riley. I apologized to her too. And that kid we cornered before, the one whose phone we tried to take. I'm trying to make it right with everyone. That's good, Daniel said, and he meant it. Can I ask you something? Brett said. When you had me in the water, when you had me beat, why didn't you just let me go under for a few more seconds? Scare me more? Make sure I really learned my lesson? Daniel thought about it. Because teaching you a lesson by hurting you would have just made you angrier. Maybe more violent later. Real change doesn't come from fear. It comes from understanding. Brett nodded slowly. My coach said I can try out for the team again next year. If I complete counseling and stay out of trouble. But honestly, I don't know if I deserve it. Maybe not right now, Daniel said. But people can change, if you do the work. They sat in silence for a moment. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation around them, but at their table it was quiet. You know what's weird? Brett said. I feel lighter now, like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally put it down. That's not weird, Daniel said. That's what happens when you stop pretending to be something you're not. Brett stood up to leave, then paused. Hey Daniel, thanks for not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself. After he left, Connor approached the table hesitant. Mind if I sit? Daniel gestured to the empty seat. I wanted to apologize too, Connor said. I went along with everything Brett did because I was too afraid to stand up to him. That's almost as bad as doing it myself. Almost, Daniel agreed. But you can change that. Starting now, Connor nodded. Jake and I talked about it. We're done following people just because they're popular or intimidating. We're going to make our own choices from now on. Over the next few weeks, things at Westfield High changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. Riley, the freshman girl, smiled at Daniel in the hallways. Other students who'd been quiet before started speaking up when they saw something wrong. Jake and Connor became friends with Daniel, genuine friends who valued him for who he was. Brett kept his distance, which Daniel understood. Some wounds needed time to heal, but occasionally Daniel would catch Brett looking at him across the cafeteria or in the hallway, and there would be a nod of acknowledgement. A silent understanding between them. Daniel's dad asked him one night at dinner how things were going. Better, Daniel said. A lot better. Did you have to use your training? His mom asked, worry in her voice. Yeah, Daniel admitted. But I used it the way Grandpa taught me. To protect, not to punish. His dad smiled. Then you learned the most important lesson of all. On his last day of senior year, Daniel was cleaning out his locker when Brett approached him one final time. I'm going to a different college than I planned, Brett said. Somewhere I can get a fresh start. But I wanted you to know that what happened this year, what you taught me, it changed my life. I'm not the same person I was. Good, Daniel said. Neither am I. They shook hands, and Daniel saw in Brett's eyes that the change was real. Not perfect, not complete, but real. As Daniel walked out of Westfield High for the last time, he thought about his grandfather's words. The purpose of learning to fight is so that you never have to. He'd lived that lesson this year in ways he never expected, and in the process, he'd learned something else. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't defeating your enemy. It's turning them into someone better. Not through force, but through choice. Through showing them a different way.